Okay, so we've got our setup. We've got configuration 1 and configuration 2. Our configuration 1 consists of our host computer, as well as server DC1, server DM1, server DM2, server SA1. Server DC1 hosts our MCSA 2016.local domain. Our server DM1 and server DM2 are joined to that domain. On our private network connection, we're using the 192.168.1.x/24 subnet. So it's a full Class C subnet. On our interior virtual switch, we're using the 192.168.1.0/24 subnet, also Class 4. One is a private switch, one is an interior switch. The server SA1, we've got configured its work group. Everything should be finished there. Everything should be done there. If you've got your static IPs set, along with your DNS server, remember, the only two that we need to point the DNS to is server DM1 and server DM2, and the DNS for those is 192.168.1.1. The domain controller asks itself for the answers to a DNS question, because it's hosting DNS. That's why we use the local loopback 127.0.0.1. At some point, we're also going to build a router, and we're going to set up, give ourselves the ability to get to the internet if we need something, but not right now. Earlier this morning, we built configuration 2, which is ServerHyperV. ServerHyperV is built. It's a virtual machine that we specify 8 gig of RAM. We disable the use of dynamic memory, so it's going to grab 8 meg of memory from our physical RAM. That's the difference between having that dynamic memory available or not. With dynamic memory turned off, you are grabbing a chunk of physical RAM to use for the virtual machine. But if we're going to create virtual machines, nested virtualization, we have to have RAM available, right? Because those VMs that are going to be nested in our VM, they're going to demand RAM. That's why we can't use the dynamic memory. Then we went and we ran our PowerShell script to enable the virtualization extensions from our physical CPU to our Hyper-V machine, allowing it to address virtualization. It was only then that we started the machine up and we installed a full copy of Windows Server 2016 Data Center with desktop experience. We gave it an IP address of 192.168.1.5. No, I take that back. That's right, we're only on the interior switch. It got an IP address of 192.168.0.5. Because before we did this, we added the interior switch and we gave those 0.1, 0.2, 0.3, 0.4 IP assignments to our Ethernet switches. In keeping with the concept of uniform naming, each one of our IP adapters or network adapters we named private. We also named interior, so we could differentiate between them. Now, as you can see on your Hyper-V configuration, there's 3 virtual machines that get built. InstallCore, Server VM1, and Server VM2. InstallCore is going to be just a VM. We're not going to install anything in it. We're going to install core when we move into Chapter 2. So we're just building the VM for it right now. So I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to open up my Hyper-V, and remembering that ServerHyperV is not part of our domain, what I'm going to do is I can simply just right click and tell it to start. I'll go ahead and double click on it to access it. I'll connect to it using the enhanced. Now there's a reason why I'm doing that enhanced interface, and you're going to see that here in just a few moments. I'm going to put my password in if I use the correct one. We'll take this full screen, make it a little bit easier to see. First off, we need to create an internal virtual switch. So I need to load Hyper-V. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to click on Hyper-V Manager. And I'm going to go down to my toolbar and I'm going to right click down on my toolbar and say pin to taskbar. I got used to doing this many years ago. If I had a domain controller, I would pin Active Directory users and computers. I would pin DNS to my taskbar. That way I didn't even have to go up to tools to access it. It was right on my toolbar because these were tools that I used all the time. The first thing we got to do is I'm going to select the Hyper-V machine. If I look at my Hyper-V settings, remember when we configured those? We did that configuration while we were installing the role. So that's already done. I can back out of settings. I'm going to select Virtual Switch Manager, and I'm going to select I want to build an internal virtual switch. So I'm going to click Create Virtual Switch. And we're simply going to rename it from New Virtual Switch to Internal Virtual Switch. And click OK. And now we've got our virtual switch that we'll be able to use. The first virtual machine that we're going to build, I'm going to simply click New Virtual Machine. I'm going to click Next. I'm going to name it InstallCore. Press Enter. We're going to make it Generation 2. They don't specify Gen 1 or Gen 2, but unless they tell us to use Gen 1, we're going to use Gen 2. So I'm going to press Enter. It says use 1 gig of RAM. So we're going to leave that set just the way it is. It's going to use 1 gig of RAM. You'll notice that dynamic memory is already turned off for it. I'm going to click Next. I'm going to connect to my interior virtual switch. I'm going to click Next. We're going to create a virtual hard disk, but instead of being 127, I'm going to follow the instructions and I'm going to specify 40 gigabytes. I'm going to click Next, and I'm going to leave it set to install an operating system later. Click Next and Finish. Now when we get to Chapter 2, we'll already have the VM there for us to install our copy of Core. That's server without the graphical front end. Do we have a copy of server to install? Not on this virtual machine, we don't. But I'm running the enhanced desktop, the enhanced connection, right? I'm going to go to my host machine, to File Explorer. I'm going to go to where I stored that ISO on my D drive. And I'm going to right click and I'm going to copy that ISO. I'm going to go back over to my server Hyper-V, and in server Hyper-V, I'm going to open up File Explorer. I'm going to navigate to the C drive, and I'm going to make a new folder. I'm just going to call it temp. And that's where I'm going to paste. Ooh, why didn't it work? Error copying file or unspecified error. Now that's unexpected. Copy. Paste. I'm going to have to figure this out. So while I figure it out, I'm going to go ahead and pause the video while we figure this out. Okay, so for some reason, it doesn't want to let us copy and paste. Should be able to. I did this morning over on my laptop. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to minimize server Hyper-V for a moment. I'm going to go into, let's see, you're not going to be able to do this. Let's see if you can do it. I'm going to right click my start button and I'm going to go to disk management. Are you able to access disk management? No. Okay, you need me to give you permission, right? Does it ask for permission or just flat out no? Just flat out no. Okay. Can you do this? Can you right click? Can you do a run? And can you type mmc.exe? Can you run that? You may get a prompt asking for authorization. Does it run MMC? Do you see something like this right here? Yes. Okay. Go up to File, Add Remove Snap-in, select Disk Management, click Add, this computer, Finish, click OK. Was everyone able to add disk management? Expand the little caret, the little arrow beside disk management. Click on it. That loads it. Okay. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to close the MMC, Microsoft Management Console, say no to saving it. What I would like everyone to do is in the search button down the bottom, I want you to click on that and then type mmc.exe and just leave that on your screen. I'm going to come around and run it as administrator and put my permissions in. In the meantime, I'm going to pause the video. Okay, so we click Run as Administrator. For me, it prompts yes or no. For you, I typed in your the credentials to give you access to it. So here we are again in the Microsoft Management Console. We're going to go up to File, Add Remove Snap-in, double click on Disk Management. We're going to manage this computer, Finish, and click OK. If I left click and select Disk Management, I should now see the disks on my computer. Did it work? Okay. So, why did we do this? Go up to the very top to the Action. Under Action, say Create a VHD. Gives you a little wizard. Where are we going to store it? We're going to store it. We're going to point to our D drive, to Hyper-V, to virtual hard disks. Same place we put all our other VHDs, right? And I'm just going to call this, storage. And I'm going to click Save. Under the format, the virtual hard disk format, I'm going to select VHDX. And I'm going to change the size. I'm going to change it from being megabytes, MB, to GB, gigabytes. And I'm going to make it 10 gigabytes. So this is what everyone should see. D Hyper-V virtual hard disk storage.vhdx 10 GB VHDX format, dynamically expanding. Everybody got that? All right. I'm going to click OK. I'm going to get rid of the magnifier. If we look down, we've got an unknown 10 gigabyte disk. What I want to do, you'll notice it says not initialized. Remember this from your PC portion? I'm going to right click on the disk number 2, say initialize disk. We're going to do it as a GUID partition table, GPT. Click OK. It's online, but it's unallocated. We can't do anything with it yet. It's not formatted. I'm going to right click and say new simple volume. Next, 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 finish. Just accept everything. Next, 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 finish. You can see here we've got our drive. It just appeared on our screen. I'm going to go back to my D drive. I'm going to go to my ISO images. There's my data center eval, right? I'm going to Control C, I'm going to copy it. I'm going to go back to it. Takes me back to my new drive. There I am in my new volume F. I'm going to paste that in. See, this is the great thing about virtual hard disks. We can create them at will. We can create them through Hyper-V Manager. We can create them through disk management. Right now, it's just a file on our hard drive, right? That's all it is. Okay, so I've got a 10 gigabit drive that I created that my computer thinks is drive F, but it's just a file on my computer. I've copied my ISO over to it. That's all I really need. I'm going to close File Explorer. I'm going to come back over to, I'm back in my MMC to disk management. Where it says disk 2 basic online, I'm going to right click and I'm going to say detach VHD. Detaching a virtual hard disk will make it unavailable. That's fine. It's not going to delete it. It's simply detaching it from the operating system. Click OK. It's gone. But it's still on my computer. If I go to my Drive D, Hyper-V, virtual hard disk, there's that VHD that I made. Guess what I'm going to do now? I'm going to close File Explorer. I'll leave the MMC open for now. I'm just going to minimize it just in case. That's my regular Hyper-V manager. I'm going to minimize that. I want to get back to my ServerHyperV. Here's my ServerHyperV virtual machine connection. I'm going to go up to File, Settings, SCSI controller, hard drive, add. I'm going to browse. There's my storage, VHDX. I'm going to click open. And I'm going to click OK. If you got it, give me a thumbs up. Okay, so I'm just going to click OK. I've got my hard drive. Now if I go to this PC, if I refresh, it's not there. Where is it? We just attached it. We have to go to disk management. So in my VM, I'm going to right click my start button. I'm going to go to disk management. You'll notice there it is. It just says offline. All I got to do is right click, say online. And just like that, there's our disk. In disk management, I simply right click on the drive and say online. And it should, does it appear? Do you have it? If I open it up, there's my ISO. So if I need to add files, I can just remove that from my settings, say remove, apply. The disk disappears from in my VM. I reattach it to my physical computer, copy whatever I want over to it, disconnect it, reconnect it to my VM, and they're all there. So now I can go ahead and I can close disk management here in my VM. We're ready to build our two server VM1 and server VM2 in ServerHyperV. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to click New, Virtual Machine. Remember, we're working in ServerHyperV, not on our physical machine. I'm going to click Next. We're going to call it Server VM1. It's going to be a Generation 2 machine. Press Enter. 1 gig of memory. So just leave the memory set the way it is. Click Next. Configure networking internal. Click Next. What's that? Generation 2. Always Generation 2 unless it specifies Generation 1. Connect to your internal switch. Under the hard drive size, specifies we want to do 40 gigabytes. We're going to click Next. And here we're going to say install an operating system from a bootable image file, and we're going to point to that ISO that we just made available. On mine, it's a E drive. There's our data center eval. Our instructions tell us that we're going to do data center desktop experience. I'm going to click Next and Finish. No gateway, no DNS, gives us an IP address. Now here it says connected to private net. That's different than what we configured before. That doesn't match with what they told us earlier. So we're going to see what we're going to do with that. We'll take a look at that. But I'm just going to go ahead and double click and connect to it. I'm going to turn it on. I'm going to have to do that, press any key to load the operating system. And we're going to roll through setting it up just like we would any other computer. Next, install. Except I'm going to do it without touching my mouse. Data center with desktop experience. Alt-N selects Next. Alt-A, Alt-N, Alt-C, Alt-N, and away we go. Which is faster? While that's installing, I'm going to go back to my Hyper-V Manager on ServerHyperV. And I'm going to create the second one. Looks like it gets set just about the exact same way, except it's going to end up with a different IP address. So new virtual machine, next, call it server VM2, next, generation 2, next, assign memory, leave it the way it is, click next. We're going to use our internal virtual switch, next. We're going to create a hard drive, however, our instructions tell us to make it 40 gigabits in size. Next. We're going to install from a bootable image file. There's my eval. Next, and finish. Now, I'm going to leave that off while this installs. Just so I don't overstress my virtual environment. Because remember, we're doing virtualization within virtualization. It doesn't have quite the performance level. Once we're done, once we've got everything fully configured, I want you to see the last line of instructions on page 7. After fully configured, create a checkpoint or /snapshot named initial config, and that will be applied at the beginning of each chapter's activities where VMs are used. So while this is installing on ServerHyperV, I'm going to minimize this. I'm going to minimize ServerHyperV off my screen. I'm going to bring up my host computer's Hyper-V. This is where we see DC, DC1, DM1, DM2, etc. My server DC1, these are all done being configured, correct? SA1, I'm going to right click on it and I'm going to tell it to shut down. That's the same as me telling it to shut down in Windows. My DM2, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to right click, shut down. DM1, rinse and repeat, shut down. Finally, after the rest of my systems are off, I'm going to right click server DC1 and tell it to shut down. Remember, first to start up, last to shut down. If it's off, we're going to make one other settings change. With DC1 still selected, select settings, and under settings down in the bottom portion under management, see automatic start action? Select that. I'm going to say always start this virtual machine automatically. So this is the only one that's going to be spec'd this way, but if we shut it down at the end of the day, when we come in the next day, it's going to start up automatically for us. We won't even have to tell it to start. That way, when we're ready to open up, start our other virtual machines, it'll already be there. I'm just going to click OK. I'm going to right-click on Server DC1 and select Checkpoint. A checkpoint's been created. See it in the middle of the screen there? I'm going to right-click on it. I'm going to rename. And I'm going to simply rename it Initial Config. I'm going to do the same thing for DM1, DM2, and SA1. Checkpoint. Right-click, rename, initial config. In fact, I'm going to save myself some typing. I'm just going to copy that. DM2, right-click, checkpoint. Right-click, rename, paste it in. I'm done. Rinse and repeat for server SA1. Checkpoint. Right click, rename, Control V, enter. I'm not going to do this for ServerHyperV yet because we're not done building it, right? If I do a checkpoint now and reset it later, it's going to wipe out every change that I make after this. That's what these initial configs are for. As we start new exercises, we're going to start afresh. So when we go from chapter 3 to chapter 4, we apply. For example, if I right click, if I select initial config, I can apply it and it's going to revert my changes back. So we'll be starting with an empty book again, or a fresh book again, so to speak. I'm going to return to my ServerHyperV and see where we're at. Well, it looks like it's running. I'm going to close it and reopen it. Oh, yeah, same deal. I don't know whether your screen's going to do that or whether this is something unique with mine. Closing it and reopen it, and there we are. Do we know what password we're going to assign? Same one, capital PA SSWORD01. My ServerHyperV has my first running virtual machine. So I'm running a virtual machine in a virtual machine. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to log into it. Now mine doesn't quite fit in the screen, but that's okay. We're going to finish the configuration on this and then we'll move on to server VM2. So basically we're going to do two things to this. We're going to set its static IP address and we're going to rename it. So I'm going to do the IP address first. I'm going to right click, Properties, IPv4, use the following address. We're going to give this 192.168.0.11. No gateway, no DNS. I'm going to click OK. And click OK. I can see they want me to allow a firewall rule. Well, I can go to Tools, Windows Firewall with Advanced View, or I can simply just run a PowerShell command. So I'm going to go to Start. I'm going to right-click Windows PowerShell, say More, Run as Administrator. My PowerShell is up. I'm going to type the following: set-net fire. I'm going to tab complete because I'm lazy and I don't want to make a mistake. I'm going to hit tab a couple times. Set-net firewall rule. Space. The next portion we do have to type FPS-ICMP4-ERQ-IN-enabled space true. So what this is doing is this is enabling ping ICMP on IP version 4 allowable inbound so that we can ping this machine. Just to make it a little bit easier, I'm going to go ahead and zoom my font a little bit larger. Can everybody see that? Same instructions that's in your booklet. If the command executes successfully, you do not get an error, give me a thumbs up. Aiden?
My update to go on, like my install.
Oh, yours is still installing?
Yeah, I just don't have opening PowerShell,
Okay.
but I have a good printers.
Right, exact same command that's in your instructions. I'm going to press enter. And you should just come back to a command prompt. I'm going to type exit and exit out of PowerShell. I can close my network connections. I'm going to click on the computer name and I'm going to rename it. I'm going to click change and rename it Server VM1. Press enter. It's going to tell me that I need, don't forget you got to reboot. I'm going to press tab. Press enter on close, restart now, you betcha. Got an error?
Yeah.
All right, let me come over and take a look. Yep, so just two characters inverted, that's all. It happens all the time. But that's especially, I mean, there's many different areas where you have to type in what you want in PowerShell, but there's a lot of areas where you can do the tab complete, and it saves you a lot of errors. I'm going to go to log on, let it start up, and then I'm going to tell it to shut down. I'm going to right click, sign out. I'm going to shut down. Planned. My virtual machine is off. I'm going to right click, checkpoint. I'm going to right click the checkpoint and rename it initial config. I'm going to start up server VM2 and do the same thing. Let it get set up. Press any key, and away we go. You'll notice that the install time wasn't hardly different at all. And actually logging into it, the performance is good, right? It's amazing that you can do this. Next, install. Data center with desktop experience. ANCN. And now when this is done, we'll set the static IP address. We'll do the same thing for the firewall rule. And we'll rename the computer, restart it, shut it down, and take our checkpoint and rename it initial config, and these will be set. Once these are set, then we can shut down our ServerHyperV and take a checkpoint on our host machine and name it initial config. If you want to go to the GUI and set that same firewall rule, if I go to Server Manager and go to Tools and go down to Windows Firewall with Advanced Security, that same firewall rule is located under Inbound. Remember that from the command string? -in. And scroll down right here, FPS-ICMP4 echo request. This is it right here. Right there is the same rule that we just enabled through a command prompt or through a PowerShell command. If I right click, I can enable the rule. It does the same thing. We'll let this complete. When it's complete, as I said, we're going to log in. We're going to set our static IP address. We're going to set our firewall rule. We're going to rename the computer. We're going to restart it. Once it's restarted, we're going to shut down. We'll take our initial config checkpoint in ServerHyperV. We'll then shut down ServerHyperV and take its checkpoint in our host computer. If you want to refer back to this, I'm going to post this recording to my YouTube page.